Hi, my name is Camilo Payan, and thank you for coming to this talk, Mastering the Macro Machine. You can find me online at cam.bio. And let's get right into it. I work for a company called TestDouble, where we work to make software better. And as an aside, we're hiring. But as part of my work as a consultant at TestDouble, I maintain a library that we have called StandardRB, which helps Ruby developers get started with a baseline for the popular Ruby linting tool, Rubocop. So for this talk, I went ahead and made myself some silly little tasks. We're going to disable every cop, and we're going to create a table of contents for the README file. And I want to do this all in Vim with the power of movements and macros. So what do I mean by movements? Movements are the building blocks of text editing in Vim. There are commands in normal mode that will move you somewhere else. The most basic, which you probably already know, are H, J, K, and L. And what's really great is you can combine those movements by prefixing them with a number to have it go more than once. So let's go ahead and demo that by opening up our base config file. And J goes down, K goes up. If we go over here, L goes to the right, and H goes to the left. Now if we do 5J, it takes us down 5 lines. And what do we mean by macros? So a macro is basically a recording of the keystrokes. You start one by using Q and the letter that you want to name your macro. You can also use numbers, but I recommend you use letters for a reason that will become more obvious later. Then you do all your keystrokes, and Vim is recording them, and then you can finish your recording with Q. Then you can repeat your macro with @ and the letter that you gave your macro. So let's get to work on disabling every cop in this file. And if we take a look at the config, all these cops are enabled or disabled using this kind of line here where it says enabled true or enabled false. So let's start our macro. I want to call it A. And first things first, we're going to search for the word enabled. Then we're going to hit L a bunch of times to get to where we want to be. And then we'll change the rest. We'll just put an F for now. And then once we're back in normal mode, we hit Q to finish recording. So now if I go down to line 17 and I run @A, it runs it again. So this is the general idea of macros. I don't have to redo all of the keystrokes by hand over and over again. Saves you a bunch of time. Now, F is for respect, but we actually want the whole word false, and we're going to do that by appending to the end of the macro. So if I made my macro QA, so I'm going ahead and at the same spot where my macro ends, use Q capital A, and you can see it now says recording @A, and let's append to the end of the line. And finish recording our macro with Q. And now, even if I change this to something really cool, it works. I didn't have to re-record my macro from scratch, and the reason that that works is because of Vim's registers. So your macros are stored, just like everything else, in Vim's registers. So if you run the registers command, you can take a look at them. There's a bunch of them around here. They are named after letters and numbers, and there are some special names too. But in this case, we chose the name A for our macro, and you can see here, these are all the keystrokes that I was doing to make the macro work. Even the part that we appended to the end of the macro is still there. Now, the cool part about this is because we know where this is, we can start manipulating our macro by taking it out of the register, and we can change it. And in this way, we can go ahead and improve our macro by using some more interesting movements than HJKL. So, one kind of low-hanging fruit here is all these L's. We want to replace those with something a little more elegant, a little smaller. So let me go ahead and introduce you to these movements. W takes you to the beginning of the next word. So to the slash, to the capital G, and to the colon on this line. E actually goes to the end of the word that you are currently on. So instead of going to the slash, you're going to go to the R. Slash is considered a word. And for the next one, it's going to go to this T instead of going to the G. So that's a useful thing, especially if you need to append to the end of the word. B goes backward a word. So it's kind of the opposite of W. And I really like using these a lot in my day-to-day. F forward searches on a letter. So if I do F to the colon, that goes to the end. Let's do FE, and then you can use a semicolon to keep searching forward for the next E that happens. And similarly, there's a reverse version with a capital F. capital F-E, and you can use colon and go backward to wherever the next E is. So I'm looking at this line, I'm thinking we go ahead and use F colon to get to the colon, and we use W to get to the beginning of the next word, and that should do great. And it's actually a pattern that you can use a lot in YAML files like this. So let's change all these L's and hit F colon W. Now we can yank all of this into our A register. And I can show you, right, those L's are gone, F colon W, that's what we've got now. And let's go ahead and change this to some really cool name that I just made up and run it again. And we get exactly what we were expecting because nothing actually changed, but we did make this macro a little smaller, a little more easy to read if we need to keep changing it, which we are going to. So one handy tip is to go ahead and prefix your macros. This helps a lot with consistency. So sometimes your macro, especially if you're working with a less structured document like this, like code or a text document, you don't know exactly where your macro is going to end up. So it would behoove you to make sure your macro always starts in the same kind of spot. So these movements will help you a lot with that. You can use 0 to get to the 0th character, which will always be the very first character on the line. Or you can use caret to get to the first non-white space character on the line. Those are both pretty useful. For this, I'm going to go ahead and use 0. And let's yank that back into our register. Make sure it's there. All right, there's the 0 that we wanted. And now, even if I'm at the end of the line, I run my macro with @A. And because it goes back to the beginning of the line, it makes sure to change it right there instead of maybe going to the next line like the search would have. Another thing you can do is suffix your macros. So you want to suffix your macro in order to set up the next run of the macro, and then you can repeat it like we did with 5J and really unlock the repetition of your macro. Now, these are different movements that you could be using. So plus takes you to the beginning of the next line. See here it goes to the dash, over there it went to the capital E. And it's basically the same as using J and then the caret key, but it's only one key, so that's nice. Another thing that you could use for suffixing is N, which takes you to the next instance of your search, and that could be useful here because actually we are searching for the word enabled. And another thing that you could do is use star, which takes you to the next instance of the word under your cursor, which is really useful depending on what you're doing, but it's worth remembering that it does replace your search. So now if you hit N, it's going to be looking for bundler, not enabled. For the purposes of this macro, I'm going to go ahead and add a plus. Let's go ahead and yank it back into our A register, which we won't actually be able to see that. And now I can go ahead and let's go to number 10, hit @A, and it works. And it takes us to the next line, which means I could do something like 20 @A, and it's just going to keep running without having any problem. This is a long file, so we could let it run for quite a while. But since we suffixed it with something that sets up the next run, we can take advantage of this. And look how little typing I'm doing. But a lot of work got done. All right. So the next task that I gave myself was creating a table of contents for READMEs. So when a README file gets pretty long for an open source project like this, I really like for there to be some kind of table of contents. That way I can go straight to information that I want without having to kind of read through the whole file. And since this is a markdown file, we can kind of guess that every heading is going to start with a hash. There's actually a Ruby comment here, but it looks like we're starting with 2 hashes anyway. So that's how we're going to get our information. And I want to create this table of contents using marks and jumps. So here we are starting at the top. I think after the intro would be a good place for the table of contents. And what is a mark? So a mark is a way that Vim keeps track of a spot that you tell it. And in this case, we're going to do that with the command M and Z to set a mark called Z right here on line 38. Now, no matter where I am, I can use the jump command, which is a single quote, and in this case, a Z, to go back to the same spot. Doesn't matter if I'm at the beginning of the document or at the end, I can always go back to the same spot as long as I remember the name. So let's get to work on our macro. We're going to go ahead and record it in A again, and we'll prefix it with a 0, start with searching forward for the next heading. Let's go forward a word. And into our S register, I'm going to go ahead and yank all of this. Now let's go to the next line, and I want to start thinking ahead and set up the next run of this by creating a mark right here. We're going to call it X. Now let's jump back to where we want our table of contents. That's not great. We'll get rid of that in a second. Go to Insert and put in our stuff. I'm going to make a markdown link. I give it anchor. I'm really not sure if GitHub will accept just the text like that, but we can figure that out some other time. Now I want to create a new mark here. So that's going to be our new Z mark. And let's go back to our X mark. And that's it. That's our macro. Now I already remember that there was actually a problem in my macro. I'm not really sure where that was, but let's see if it works. Now, the next heading, I think, is usage. So let's see if that works. Yeah, see, I have an error in the middle of my macro. So this is when I start putting this stuff together. This looks good. This is all of that must go. Cool. Now we have a macro that works. Now if we run it again, we should get usage. Let's take a look for our table of contents. Yeah, we have usage going up here. And now if you run it, like 5 more times, that's going to be fun to watch. 10 more times. I don't actually know how many headers there are here. Let's try another 5. I think that takes us, let's do another one. And now we have a problem. We went to the beginning of the document again. So let's take a look at our table of contents. We have everything that we expect, but now we have the title. We don't want that. How can we solve this? We can do it using a recursive macro. And let's go ahead and get rid of the table of contents that we created, make a new mark. Now, recursive macros will go ahead and run the macro inside your macro, so then it just keeps running. But in this case, since we're relying on a search, Vim will go ahead and wrap to the beginning of the document if you are still searching at that point and you're at the end of the document. But we want to get rid of that because a recursive macro won't stop unless there's an error, which is actually why I had to fix that other macro because it was going to stop in the middle of it. So how are we going to get it to error out? We're going to use this setting, no wrap scan. So if you hit no wrap scan, what happens is even if you're at the end of the document and you keep searching, so we want to search for table of contents, it's not going to keep going past the end of the document. So that will be useful in this case because now if I finish my macro by hitting @A and yank that back into my register and let it run, it's just going to run itself over and over, but when it gets to the end of the document, it's going to stop. So code of conduct is the last one that we are looking at. Let's take a look at table of contents. Yeah, it goes all the way from the rules to code of conduct. Looks great. Mission accomplished. Now, one more thing that we could take a look at is this setting here, lazy redraw. It's really fun and it's cool for demos to watch your macro run. But with lazy redraw, you can skip all that and not just sit here watching your computer work. It's going to wait until all the commands are finished, and then that's when it's going to actually redraw your file. So there we go. It can be useful, but I kind of like watching macros. Anyways, thank you so much for coming to this talk. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. You can find me online at cam.bio. I'm Cam on the Discord. And also a reminder, Test Double is hiring. And if you'd like to come work, just go ahead and ask any questions that you have. And there's also plenty of information at that link. All right, let me see where my thingy is. Cool. That's it. Thank you so much, everybody. I guess I can stop screen sharing.
Mic all the way down.
Yeah, I turned the mic down. I see that.
Yeah, we've been talking for 30 seconds now. But
Yep. Hey.
You can do Bang Scuffed in the chat.
Bang Scuffed, a great streamer here.
That dog was awesome. Super cool, really Vimmy. I love it. Chat, does anyone have any questions they'd like to give to Camilo quick?
Now, the real, I mean, I personally have something I would like to say, which is, you were doing a lot of macros there, yet I didn't see any macro pressure. You seem to be breezing through. How does one master macros so well that you don't feel macro pressure?
Yeah. How do you move from just being a normie macro user to sort of this no pressure, never cracks under pressure, macro master?
Macroception, macro master.
No pressure. For these macros, I practiced it maybe like 30, 40 times before this talk. But generally, the more you use them, the more you'll end up with like patterns that you go back to a bunch of times. Like prefixing, suffixing, all that stuff is going to end up coming naturally as long as you're intentional about doing it. And then, repetition, like just like learning Vim, as long as you keep repeating it, you'll end up figuring it out.
Okay. I mean, I'm shocked. Okay, I tried that. I thought I tried that, but it.
I thought a good question was asked in the chat about running macros over multiple files. Do you have any tricks for that?
Oh yeah. So actually, one thing that you can do that I find makes that easier is creating a function, and then you can kind of slam your macro into that by using the normal command, and then you can use something it's just. I find it easier to go ahead and do that with things like the arg list, and I forget what the other list is called. To have like a function that you call. But I do remember doing it with just macros in the past. I just don't remember how I did it.
Yeah, that seems like magic to me. I don't know about any of that.
Yeah, I guess the only other way I could think of would be if you tried to do something like maybe run it over your quick fix list or something like that. If you added all of them to the quick fix list, you could try and run something with like cdo or something like that.
Yeah.
I always laugh when I say
cdo
because I imagine myself riding around on a cdo in the water using Vim, and it's just kind of a hilarious mental picture for myself.
I like cdo because C stands for quick, and it makes me really happy.
I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that you could do something like cdo normal and then whatever your macro is here, which you could probably get out of the register by doing something like Control A. Yeah, there's a macro.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks a bunch, Camilo. And
we do have one more question.
Oh,
it's a good question. How do you edit an existing macro?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to demo, so I kind of glossed over it. But the idea is you just want to kind of put it somewhere. So I have a little scratch buffer here, and then you can do whatever edits that you want to it. Then the next step is to yank it back into the register that you had it in the first place. And so that would be the same way that you yank anything else. You use double quote and the register that you want, and then Y, and however you want to do that. Just make sure you don't use YY to get the whole line, because you'll end up with a carriage return at the end of your macro, and that will definitely mess up the macro. So you want to use Y usually to $sign at the end of the line.
So what you're trying to tell me is that when you yank into a register, it's the same thing as recording a macro to a register? That's where the macros go?
Yeah. So once you look at your registers, these are the keystrokes that you did, and so it just runs them over and over again. Vim's cool.